Charles Darwin launched his book on the origin of species in 1859, which triggered a wave of intellectual shock. Genetic tests have shown that we are embedded in the ape family as the human species of chimpanzees. The last 3 decades have witnessed an increase in our understanding of animal behavior. In the late 1980s, evolutionary ideas began to be seriously applied to the study of human behavior and the human mind. Why does an animal show a particular trait? By formulating our questions, we can identify whether behaviors are adaptations produced by the natural selection process, as well as understand advantages that traits confer on individual organisms and how they interact with other traits. No species known as an organism, except unicellular, shows a genetically determined behavior. If a behavior was really genetically determined, it would mean that it always developed in the same way in each individual, and that the environmental influences did not exert any influence at all. The organism would always behave in the same way, regardless of the circumstances. The evolutionary approach to the study of behavior raises 4 separate points that should be clarified. First of all, no organism can decide on its genetic future. Secondly, organisms behave in a way that increases offspring in future generations. The third point refers to the assumption that organisms are designed to behave in a way that maximizes their genetic fitness, and that is a heuristic device. Finally, evolutionary change cannot occur if everyone behaves in the same way. For both Darwin and Mendel, inheritance was about fidelity of the copy between parents and young, since evolutionary processes do not have to depend on genes. The things that an organism learns in its life and passes to its offspring are also part of the natural selection process. Both biologists and psychologists have focused on the cognitive mechanisms that produce behavior, the design of the human mind, so to speak. Therefore, we can only understand the mind as an adaptation if we sit in the prehistory environment in which it evolved. The fact is that the human mind, like the minds of all species with brains of a decent size, developed. The Earth's environment has never been stable at any time in Earth's long history, and any species that wanted to evolve its rigid cognitive mechanisms was signing its own extinction. Theory is about individual survival and not about species individual. Individuals act for their own reproductive interest. The theory of natural selection is based on 3 premises. Premise 1. All individuals of a species vary their behavioral, morphological, and physiological features. This is known as the principle of variation. Premise 2. Part of that variation will be transmitted from one generation to the next, the inheritance principle. Premise 3. Some of these variations will allow carriers to compete more effectively than others for scarce resources, the adaptation principle. Some people will leave more offspring than others because the particular traits they possess give them some kind of advantage. The success with which a trait is transmitted is called aptitude. This is sometimes known as the principle of evolution. If a trait remains a selective advantage, it should help increase the survival and offspring of those organisms that own it. The vision of a gene provides a way of understanding animal behavior, since it seemed to require a good for the species argument that did not quite coincide with Darwin's theory of natural selection. Such behavior, where one animal provides a benefit to another, is called altruism. William Donald Hamilton said that altruistic behavior could evolve if people who benefit from the behavior were related to the altruist, as close relatives share some of their genes. As for evolution, it doesn't matter in which body the genes are, as long as they are transmitted. The process where animals help promote the survival and reproductive success of their relatives is known as selection of relatives. It will be an advantage for animals to help non-relatives, but this only works if animals interact with the same individual repeatedly, and also if they are able to recognize each other. This process is known as reciprocal altruism. A third evolutionary explanation for altruism is known as mutualism, where 2 or more animals cooperate to achieve an objective that benefits both at the same time. Process where animals help promote the survival and reproductive success of their relatives is known as selection of relatives. It will be an advantage for animals to help non-relatives, but this only works if animals interact with the same individual repeatedly and also if they are able to recognize each other. This process is known as reciprocal altruism. A third evolutionary explanation for altruism is known as mutualism, where two or more animals cooperate to achieve an objective that benefits both at the same time. Mechanisms of family selection, reciprocal altruism, and mutualism form the basis of most of the evolutionary explanations of altruism. A surprising example of this is that within our bodies, genes do not aggressively compete with each other for space, but cooperate in the replication and collective transmission. Within groups, individuals are vehicles in direct competition with each other. However, between groups, the individuals of one group unite to compete with the individuals of another group. If there was no advantage for that group as a whole, altruistic individuals will be used by selfish individuals, and natural selection will soon eliminate all altruists. Identifying strongly with the group itself and showing a willingness to help another individual is a feature that is selected for individuals in a group. These psychological traits could help give one group a competitive advantage over another by increasing their cohesion and making members more willing to defend and protect their peers. Such traits can also reduce tensions and increase reproductive success. Loneliness Me coined the phrase niche construction to point out that animals do not passively occupy ecological niches, but actively modify them. When building, they become more than vehicles for genes, because they are now able to modify the sources of natural selection of the environment, and have a certain responsibility to select their own genes. In our history, the evolution of stone tools and niche building feature expanded the range of edible fruits. Evolution produced changes in our digestive morphology and in the evolution of brain size. According to genetic evidence, human and chimpanzee lineages separated about 5 and 7 million years ago. The first known members of the hominid lineage, the Australopithecus, are fairly standard apes. The great change came about 2.5 million years ago, when the genus Homo emerged, to which modern humans belong. Increased brain volume, height, changes in anatomy of the legs and hips occurred, and the stone tools were increasingly sophisticated. With the appearance of Homo ergaster about 2 million years ago, the manufacture of stone tools was improved. They had habitats farther from stagnant water and a more nomadic way of life. Important points about this phase of our history are that during much of the period in which Homo ergaster was in Africa, there were other hominids next to him. Therefore, the tree of human evolution is more like a bush than the traditional view of a single straight stem that leads from simian-like ancestors to modern humans. The second point is that ergaster maintains its stability over a long period of time. Although Homo erectus has survived in parts of Asia until just 60,000 years ago, it was replaced in Africa by one or more species of archaic humans. In Europe, Neanderthals finally occupied the Ice Age habitats of Europe until about 28,000 years ago.
The most controversial issue in evolutionary psychology is whether it is our genes or our education that determines our behavior. Neither genes nor the environment can do the work themselves. The important thing is the interaction between these two influences. If genes and the environment interact to produce an individual, they must be similar to those of previous generations for a typical version of a species of the individual to occur. This means that for evolution to take place, there must be genetics, inheritance, and continuity. Behavioral geneticists are interested in the heritability of particular traits, which measures whether it is possible to predict the distribution of a trait in the generation of offspring. For example, height is a feature with relatively high heritability among humans. Much of the variation in height can be explained by the height of the parents. Instincts are behaviors shared by all members of a species, which are innate and therefore emerge without learning and do not undergo any change once they have appeared. If we do something instinctively, does that mean we don't have control of our behavior? A certain behavior is one that appears fully formed, not natural, and did not undergo any change thereafter, but that is very difficult to determine. In addition to the periods of rapid learning that occur shortly after birth, it is also possible that they occur before the event, but only because a behavior is present at birth, one should not assume that there has been no learning involved. Babies can recognize the smell of breast milk, considered an instinct. This probably explains why mothers can recognize their own babies only by smell, even shortly after birth. It is not an instinct, it is the learning process that the mother has suffered during pregnancy and of which she herself is not aware. A reflex is a type of involuntary response to stimulation. The more reflex is observed at birth and usually disappears after 3 or 4 months. A sudden change in position causes a small baby to extend his legs and arms outward with open hands and then slowly return to a flexed position. This is shown for the first time in the uterus, around 8 months pregnant. Babies who have a defect in this system are more likely to have their feet born first, since they surely cannot distinguish between up and down. Perhaps the one that can really be considered an instinct is the social smile. Babies begin to smile for the first time in about 2 months. Prior to this, they often smile spontaneously, but these smiles are not related to any particular emotional state. On the contrary, social smiles that begin at 2 months of age are real smiles, since they involve a specific muscle that cannot be controlled voluntarily. Over time, babies learn to modify their smiles according to the particular situation they are in. All children follow essentially identical schedules to learn to speak. First of all, they begin to babble around 2 months of age, and after 4 years, they begin to produce appropriate phrases. Children acquire language quickly and easily during this period, but as they reach puberty, the ability to acquire language decreases, and by adulthood, language learning becomes more difficult. The change to a complete grammatical discourse correlates with the maturation of the areas in the left hemisphere of the brain associated with speech. The Wernicke area, part of the brain associated with semantics, shows a peak in synaptic formation between the 8th and 12th month. In contrast, the Broca area, associated with the syntax, reaches its synaptic peak between the 15th and 24th month. Children under 4 can have their entire left hemisphere removed and still learn to speak, read, and write perfectly, but if it is lost at an early age, all language functions are lost with it. Since babies can hear and process speech sounds in the womb, they can begin to learn something about language before birth. Like smiling, language is an innate ability that becomes tuned in by experience. Children do not need to be actively taught to speak. Their innate abilities guide them, and during the sensitive period of childhood, they do so effortlessly. After reading these 3 chapters, we have thought about a question to the author, specifically related to the last one, and that is, if according to him, babies can recognize the smell of breast milk, considered an instinct, what happens to babies who don't drink breast milk?